Ladies and gentlemen, let us explore a curious paradox, one that shapes your life, my life, and the lives of all those who wrestle with their own reflection. This is not a battle against external forces, not a war fought against the world or its chaos. No, the struggle we speak of tonight is subtler, yet more profound. The essence of the internal conflict lies in the peculiar relationship we have with ourselves, a relationship often marked by struggle, tension, and an almost relentless desire to change, improve, or overcome certain parts of our being. This struggle is not external. It does not involve adversaries or challenges imposed by the outside world. Instead, it is a deeply personal battle that occurs within the confines of our own mind and heart. The curious nature of this conflict is that it pits one part of us against another, creating a sense of division where, in truth, there is none. Consider the way we speak to ourselves. One voice might rise with the fervor of a coach or disciplinarian, urging us to do more, be more, achieve more. This voice insists that we are not enough as we are, that improvement is the only path to worthiness or happiness. It is the voice of expectation, the one that defines who we believe we should be. On the other side, there is often a quieter, resistant voice. This part of us doubts, procrastinates, or retreats into avoidance. It resists the demands of the first voice, not out of malice, but out of fear, exhaustion, or confusion. These two forces, what we might call the striver and the doubter, are not enemies. Yet when we engage in this internal conflict, we perceive them as such. The striver believes the doubter is an obstacle to success, while the doubter sees the striver as a relentless critic who will never be satisfied. In this battle, we expend immense energy fighting ourselves, trying to suppress or eliminate one part in favor of the other. But here lies the paradox: both voices are you. The striver and the doubter are simply two expressions of your mind, each trying in its own way to serve you. The striver pushes for growth and achievement, while the doubter seeks safety and comfort. Their intentions, though seemingly at odds, are rooted in a desire to protect and guide you. When we fail to recognize this, the internal conflict intensifies. The battle against oneself often leads to a cycle of frustration and guilt. We set goals and make plans, driven by the striver's demands, only to falter or delay, succumbing to the doubter's hesitations. In these moments, the striver lashes out, berating us for our perceived failures. This self-criticism deepens the divide, and we feel stuck, torn between opposing forces within us. Yet this conflict is not inevitable. It arises from a misunderstanding of the self, a belief that these internal voices are separate and antagonistic rather than interconnected and complementary. When we step back and observe the striver and the doubter without judgment, we begin to see their true nature. They are not enemies, but parts of a whole, each offering valuable insights. The striver reminds us of our potential, encouraging us to dream and pursue meaningful goals. The doubter, meanwhile, invites us to pause, reflect, and ensure that our actions align with our well-being. Together, these voices can guide us toward a balanced, harmonious life if only we learn to listen without fighting. To dissolve the internal conflict, we must shift our perspective. Instead of treating ourselves as a battleground, we can embrace our inner complexity with curiosity and compassion. This means acknowledging the striver's ambitions without letting them become tyrannical, and understanding the doubter's fears without allowing them to paralyze us. It is not about choosing one side over the other, but about integrating both into a unified self. When we stop battling ourselves, we free up the energy once spent on internal struggle. This energy can be redirected toward creativity, connection, and growth. We come to realize that the only enemy in this battle was the illusion of separation within us. In truth, there is no conflict, only the unfolding of our wholeness. This realization is not just a resolution of the struggle, it is a profound liberation, a return to the simple truth that we are already complete as we are. In the battle within ourselves, we often assume dual roles: the hero striving for greatness and the villain obstructing our path. This paradox is at the heart of the human experience, a dynamic interplay of forces that are both opposing and intertwined. To see ourselves as both hero and villain is not to divide our identity, but to illuminate the complexity of who we are and how we relate to our inner struggles. The hero within us represents our aspirations, the part of us that dreams big and reaches for the extraordinary. This aspect of ourselves is the one that sets goals, embraces challenges, and strives to overcome obstacles. It is fueled by a vision of what we could be if only we tried hard enough, worked long enough, and believed deeply enough. The hero is the embodiment of hope and resilience, the part of us that refuses to settle for mediocrity. On the other hand, the villain is the shadow lurking in the background, casting doubt on our abilities and sabotaging our progress. It is the part of us that procrastinates, succumbs to fear, and whispers, "You're not good enough." The villain isn't malicious in the traditional sense. It doesn't seek to harm us for harm's sake. Instead, it often arises from a place of self-protection, shielding us from perceived risks, failures, or discomforts. It may hold us back, but it does so with the misguided intent of keeping us safe. The tension between these two aspects of ourselves creates an internal drama that plays out in our minds every day. The hero pushes forward, determined to achieve, while the villain resists, pulling us back into the comfort of the familiar. This dynamic is not a simple clash of good versus evil. It is a reflection of the complexity of being human. Both the hero and the villain are born from the same source: our desires, fears, and unmet needs. The trouble begins when we identify too strongly with one role over the other. If we see ourselves only as the hero, we risk becoming self-critical and relentless, punishing ourselves for every misstep and failure. The world becomes a battlefield, and we are constantly at war, not with others, but with ourselves. On the other hand, if we see ourselves only as the villain, we succumb to defeatism, believing we are incapable of change or growth. In either case, we lose sight of the truth that these roles are not fixed, they are fluid and interdependent. The hero needs the villain just as much as the villain needs the hero. Without the villain, the hero would have no challenge to overcome, no obstacles to refine their strength and character. Without the hero, the villain would remain unchallenged, never learning to relinquish its grip or transform its fear into wisdom. This interplay is not a battle to be won, but a relationship to be understood and balanced. When we accept that we are both hero and villain, we begin to approach ourselves with greater compassion. The hero can learn to listen to the villain, understanding its fears and motivations instead of trying to crush it into submission. Similarly, the villain can learn to trust the hero, recognizing that its courage and ambition are not threats but allies in the journey of growth. This shift in perspective allows us to transcend the binary labels of hero and villain. We see that they are not separate entities but two expressions of the same self. The struggles we face are not evidence of our failure but opportunities for integration and self-awareness. To live as both hero and villain is to embrace the wholeness of who we are. It is to recognize that our light and shadow are not adversaries but partners in the dance of existence. In this realization, the battle within dissolves, replaced by a sense of unity and peace. We are not perfect, nor do we need to be. We are simply human, navigating the complex and beautiful interplay of all that we are, and in that we find our strength. The internal battle we wage with ourselves often feels inevitable, as though it is the only path to growth, success, or peace. We push and pull within, caught in a cycle of striving to overcome one part of ourselves in favor of another. Yet have we ever paused to ask, is this battle truly necessary? What if the struggle we perceive as essential is, in fact, an illusion, one that obscures a deeper truth about our nature? To question the necessity of this battle is to step back and examine its roots. Why do we feel compelled to fight ourselves? For many, it stems from a belief that there is something inherently wrong or inadequate about who we are. We see parts of ourselves, our fears, our doubts, our imperfections as enemies to be eradicated. The battle begins when we divide ourselves into the acceptable and the unacceptable, waging war on what we deem undesirable. This division creates tension. We identify with the part of us that strives for improvement, often ignoring or suppressing the part that resists. But suppression breeds conflict, and the more we fight to silence one side, the louder it becomes. The battle intensifies, consuming our energy and leaving us feeling exhausted and fragmented. Yet, if we pause to reflect, we may find that this struggle is not as inevitable as it seems. The parts of ourselves we label as obstacles, our fears, doubts, and resistances, are not inherently harmful. They exist for a reason, often as responses to past experiences or as mechanisms to protect us. The part of us that hesitates or retreats may be trying to shield us from failure or pain. The part that doubts may be asking us to consider new perspectives or slow down when we rush too quickly. When we see these aspects of ourselves not as enemies but as parts of a whole, the need for battle diminishes. The struggle arises not because these parts exist but. Acceptance over force is a transformative approach to the internal struggles we all experience. It is a shift from conflict to understanding, from resistance to openness. For many of us, the instinct is to control, suppress, or force change within ourselves when we encounter behaviors, thoughts, or emotions we dislike. We see these aspects as obstacles to be conquered, believing that if we could only overpower them, we would finally be free. But this approach often leads to exhaustion, frustration, and a sense of being at war with our own mind. And to embrace acceptance instead of force is to recognize a fundamental truth: we cannot bully ourselves into peace. Force creates resistance. The more we push against a part of ourselves, be it fear, doubt, or procrastination, the more it pushes back. This cycle of resistance intensifies the very struggles we seek to overcome, trapping us in an endless loop of conflict. Acceptance, on the other hand, offers a different way forward. It does not mean giving up or resigning ourselves to stagnation. Instead, it means acknowledging all parts of ourselves, the ambitious and the hesitant, the joyful and the sorrowful, the confident and the insecure, without judgment. Acceptance is the act of seeing ourselves fully as we are, and saying, "This is me, and that's okay." When we accept ourselves, we create space for understanding. Take, for example, the part of you that procrastinates. Force would have you suppress or shame this tendency, driving yourself to act out of guilt or fear. But acceptance invites you to pause and ask, why am I resisting? What does this part of me need? Perhaps procrastination arises from a fear of failure or a need for rest. By listening to this part of yourself with compassion, you can address its underlying concerns rather than battling its surface behavior. This shift from force to acceptance is not only kinder but also more effective. Force may create temporary results, but it does so at the cost of inner harmony. Acceptance fosters lasting change by building a foundation of self-trust. When you accept yourself, you no longer see parts of your mind as enemies to be defeated. Instead, you see them as allies with valuable insights, even if their methods are misguided. Imagine approaching your inner critic, the voice that tells you you're not good enough, with acceptance. Force would have you silence or argue with this voice, trying to drown it out with affirmations or logic. Acceptance, however, invites you to listen. Why does this voice exist? What is it trying to protect you from? Often the inner critic stems from a desire to shield us from failure or rejection, even if its approach is harsh. By understanding its intentions, we can soften its influence without needing to fight it. Acceptance also transforms the way we pursue growth. When we force ourselves to change, we do so from a place of inadequacy, believing we must fix what is broken. Acceptance, however, recognizes that growth is not about fixing but unfolding. It is about nurturing the potential that already exists within us, allowing it to flourish naturally. This approach is not only gentler but also more sustainable, as it aligns with the rhythm of who we are rather than working against it. In accepting ourselves, we also learn to accept life. The struggle we experience internally often mirrors our relationship with the world. When we stop fighting against our thoughts and feelings, we become more open to the unpredictability of life itself. Acceptance teaches us to flow with challenges, rather than resisting them, to embrace uncertainty rather than fearing it. Ultimately, acceptance over force is an act of liberation. It frees us from the exhausting cycle of self-imposed battles and invites us to live in harmony with ourselves. It reminds us that we are not problems to be solved, but beings to be understood. And in understanding, we find peace. Integration of the self is the process of bringing together all the disparate parts of who we are into a unified whole. It is not about perfection or the elimination of flaws, but about embracing the fullness of our being, the light and shadow, strengths and weaknesses, desires and fears. In a world that often teaches us to compartmentalize or suppress parts of ourselves, integration offers a path to inner harmony and authenticity. At the heart of integration is the realization that we are not divided, even though we may feel that way. The internal conflict, the battle between the parts of us that strive and those that resist, that hope and that fear is not a war between separate entities, but a misunderstanding of our inner landscape. The various aspects of ourselves are not enemies to be subdued, but threads of the same fabric, each with its role in the intricate design of who we are. When we label certain parts of ourselves as good and others as bad, we create unnecessary tension. For instance, we may see ambition as a positive trait and hesitation as a weakness. But hesitation can serve a purpose. It encourages us to pause, reflect, and evaluate before acting. Likewise, ambition, though powerful, can become destructive if it pushes us toward burnout. Integration means recognizing the value in both and allowing them to coexist, each tempering the other in a way that creates balance. This process of integration begins with awareness. It requires us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without judgment. When anger arises, instead of suppressing it, we can ask, what is this anger trying to tell me? When self-doubt creeps in, we can explore its roots rather than dismissing it as a flaw. Every part of us, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient, has something to teach if we are willing to listen. Acceptance is a crucial step in integration. To integrate the self, we must let go of the need to reject or fix certain aspects of who we are. This doesn't mean condoning harmful behaviors or stagnating in unhelpful patterns. Rather, it means acknowledging that these behaviors or patterns have a reason for existing. They often originate from a place of protection or unmet needs. By understanding their purpose, we can transform them rather than suppressing them. Integration also involves a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing ourselves as fragmented, one part striving for success, another part fearing failure, we begin to see the interconnectedness of these parts. The part of us that strives is motivated by a desire for fulfillment, while the part that fears is motivated by a desire for safety. Both are valid and both contribute to the whole. When we honor their contributions, we create space for them to work together rather than against each other. As we integrate, we move toward wholeness. This does not mean achieving a state of perfect harmony or erasing internal conflict entirely. Life is dynamic, and so are we. There will always be moments of tension, times when one part of us feels at odds with another. But integration allows us to approach these moments with curiosity and compassion, knowing that conflict is not a sign of failure but an invitation to deeper understanding. The benefits of integration ripple outward. When we stop battling ourselves, we free up energy once spent on internal struggles. This energy can be channeled into creativity, connection, and growth. Integration also deepens our relationships with others as we become more authentic and empathetic. When we accept all parts of ourselves, we become more accepting of others, recognizing that their complexities mirror our own. Ultimately, integration of the self is a journey of reconciliation. It is about coming home to who we are, not as fragmented pieces, but as a cohesive whole. In this wholeness, we find peace not because we have eradicated conflict, but because we have learned to embrace it as part of the beautiful, ever-evolving tapestry of our being. Liberation through surrender is a profound and paradoxical truth. In our culture, where striving and control are often seen as the paths to success, the idea of surrender can feel counterintuitive. Yet it is in surrendering, not in giving up, but in letting go, that we discover the freedom we so deeply seek. Liberation does not come from forcing ourselves into conformity or endlessly battling our fears and imperfections. Instead, it emerges when we release the need to fight against what is and embrace the flow of life as it unfolds. To understand surrender, we must first explore what it is not. Surrender is not passivity or resignation. It does not mean abandoning your goals, ceasing to care, or accepting injustice. Surrender is an active choice to release the illusion of control over things that cannot be controlled: our thoughts, emotions, the actions of others, and the unpredictability of life itself. It is recognizing the futility of clinging to rigid expectations and allowing life to move through us with grace and openness. The internal battle we often wage with ourselves is rooted in resistance. We resist feelings we don't like: fear, anger, sadness, and try to suppress or fight them. We resist circumstances we wish were different, clinging to the hope that force or effort will change them. But resistance creates tension. It ties us up in knots, leaving us frustrated and drained. The more we resist, the more stuck we feel, and the cycle perpetuates itself. Surrender, on the other hand, dissolves this tension. To surrender is to say, this is where I am right now, and I accept it. It is not an act of defeat, but an act of courage. When we surrender, we stop expending energy on resistance and instead channel it into understanding and compassion. If fear arises, we don't try to push it away, we let it be, recognizing it as a natural part of being human. If circumstances feel overwhelming, we stop fighting against them and instead ask, what can I learn from this? How can I grow through this experience? Liberation through surrender lies in the freedom to be fully present. When we stop clinging to how we think things should be, we open ourselves to how things are. This openness allows us to respond to life with clarity and creativity, rather than reacting out of fear or frustration. For example, when a goal isn't unfolding as planned, surrender enables us to pivot and adapt rather than becoming paralyzed by disappointment. Surrender also brings a profound sense of inner peace. Much of our inner turmoil comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. We fight against our emotions, judge ourselves for our imperfections, and strive to be something we're not. But when we surrender, we realize that we don't need to be anything other than what we are in this moment. Peace arises not from fixing ourselves, but from accepting ourselves. This act of letting go is deeply liberating. It frees us from the burden of constant striving and self-criticism. It allows us to rest in the knowledge that we are enough as we are. Surrender helps us see that the battle we thought we needed to win was never necessary. The parts of ourselves we tried to conquer, the fear, the doubt, the sadness, were not enemies but teachers, guiding us toward greater understanding and wholeness. Liberation through surrender also deepens our connection to others and the world around us. When we let go of rigid expectations, we become more present in our relationships, more open to new experiences, and more attuned to the beauty of life's unpredictability. Surrender teaches us that control is not the source of power, openness is. Ultimately, surrender is a return to trust in ourselves, trust in life, and trust in the unfolding of the journey. It is the realization that we do not need to fight or force our way to freedom. Freedom is already within us, waiting to be discovered when we release the chains of resistance and embrace the flow of existence. In surrender, we find liberation, not as something to be achieved, but as something that has been with us all along.